Hello there, you're watching RT International, just gone 7 p.m. here in Moscow, and we'll start this hour with breaking news too, because unconfirmed reports are coming in that one person has been killed and 15 more injured in clashes between the Venezuelan military and protesters near the border with Brazil. Demonstrators had been demanding the border be opened to allow aid through. At the same time, extra security forces had been dispatched to the area. The military reportedly opened fire on the demonstrators. Well, 3 of those injured are said to be in a critical condition. It does come after confusion over the border closure broke out as President Nicolas Maduro had closed the frontier with Brazil amid a row over humanitarian aid. But then the self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido ordered for it to be reopened.
12 people have been injured and 1 killed as a result of this crime. Our thoughts are with them. This will not go unpunished. Decide on which side you're on. To all the military, between today and tomorrow, you will define the way in which you want to be remembered. We already know you're on the side of the people. You've made that very clear. Tomorrow, you'll be able to prove that.
Meanwhile, the British billionaire businessman Richard Branson has organised a concert in Colombia. It's being dubbed Venezuela Live Aid and is meant to persuade the country's military to defy Maduro and let aid into the country. It also aims to raise $100 million for humanitarian aid. Maduro stated there would be a counter-concert this weekend on Venezuela's side of the border. His concert will take place 2 days later than Branson's, but is aimed to counter the efforts to defy Maduro. Well, let's get some reaction to all of this now with Lucas Corona. He's a political analyst and he joins us now. Good evening to you, Lucas. Reports are coming in that there have been quite severe clashes on the borders there with humanitarian aid stockpiled and obviously big arguments about whether it should be allowed in or not. I suppose this was inevitable, do you think, given the tensions that have been building?
Yeah, I think we have to see this as, an attempt by the United States and the opposition to create these kinds of situations of provocation. And certainly, we don't know all the details of what happened on the border with Brazil, and definitely we need to wait for a response from the Venezuelan government about whether the exact details of what happened and whether there will be investigations, prosecutions of those officials that allegedly were involved. But nonetheless, we should recognize that over 70 Venezuelan international humanitarian groups just came out yesterday denouncing what is being called this humanitarian aid effort, given on the grounds that it is politicized, and it's an attempt by the United States to use humanitarian aid as a means of toppling the democratically elected Maduro government. Likewise, the United Nations and other humanitarian bodies such as the International Red Cross, Oxfam, have criticized this politicization of aid by the United States government.
What's the feeling like in Caracas, where you are at the moment? Are people buying into the argument that this humanitarian aid could be used to perhaps supply the opposition with weapons in Venezuela?
I think that among the supporters of Nicolas Maduro, there's definitely great concern. Given there's a consciousness of the history of the United States in providing humanitarian aid. We shouldn't forget that Mr. Elliot Abrams, who is the current special envoy to Venezuela in the 1980s, was in the State Department, was actually using planes earmarked for humanitarian purposes to shuttle arms to the Nicaraguan paramilitaries in the 1980s, as well as, of course, supporting death squads in El Salvador and Guatemala. So there's definitely a lot of skepticism towards the United States effort, also given that the U.S. is currently imposing an oil embargo on Venezuela, which is going to deny the country over $11 billion this year in lost oil earnings from oil exports. And, in contrast, this humanitarian aid is $20 million or maybe $100 million at maximum. This oil embargo is going to cost Venezuela $30 million a day, which, obviously is going to have drastic humanitarian consequences.
Is that how people see it in Caracas? I keep coming back to this because when you read about it outside of Venezuela, you look at the international media and the problems in Venezuela have all been the fault of Maduro. But do people perhaps sense it's the crippling sanctions being placed on Venezuela by America that are also partly to blame?
I think that Venezuelan society is incredibly divided. Certainly because Maduro does enjoy, continues to enjoy support from 30% of the population or more. perhaps up to 40, even 50, half the population that opposes international intervention in the country. But of course, the opposition is mobilizing its supporters who want to bring in the aid. And of course, the issue is there's a lot of skepticism towards this opposition as well, because the opposition in Venezuela has a very high disapproval rate, almost as high as the government, according to data analysis pollster, opposition line pollster. And there's a real concern or trying to figure out how the opposition is going to be able to really bring in and distribute this aid, given that, it is, so for so many years has promised to oust the government and, install a new government, yet it has been unable to make good on those promises. And Saturday, we're a month in since Mr. Guaido swore himself in as interim president of Venezuela, yet he is no closer to sitting in Miraflores Palace and is instead kind of resorting to these sort of media spectacles of these maneuvers on the border and threats of military intervention and crushing sanctions to put him in power, as opposed to, sort of mobilization, any kind of real domestic force that could change the balance of forces within Venezuela.
With regard to the humanitarian aid and the situation there, we hear that Maduro says, look, I'll welcome aid from the EU, but not from the US. Is there much sense that could solve the problem?
Well, indeed, I think it's important to remember that Maduro did ask for and receive aid from the UN and other international bodies in November of last year, and likewise is receiving aid, a new shipment of medicine from Russia and now the EU. So I think the issue is not the aid as such, but it's who is the giver. And given the United States has, sought to topple this government for the last 2 decades, supporting a violent coup in 2002, remember, with Mr. Elliot Abrams at that time reportedly giving the green light to go ahead for the opposition to oust democratically elected President Hugo Chavez, there's definitely concern about what are the intentions of the United States, what is the agenda with its aid.
As we speak right now, Lucas, we know that Richard Branson, the British billionaire, has his concert that he's arranged. It's sort of a Live Aid style concert, isn't it? Encouraging the Venezuelan military to turn against Maduro. Do you think it will have much impact?
Yeah, we just saw the New York Times reported yesterday that Hugo Carvajal, who is a former intelligence chief for Chavez, reportedly defected. However, he had broken with the government in 2017, so this is hardly a new development. The reality on the ground is that no major Venezuelan military official actually commanding troops has defected to the side of Mr. Guaido, and this reveals a certain desperation on the part of Guaido and Washington that 1 month in they're still not able to actually bring to fruition the military coup that they've been calling for continually.
OK, Lucas, we're going to have to leave it there, but it's really good to get your thoughts on this. That was Lucas Corno, a political analyst actually based in Caracas. Thank you. Well, meanwhile, the Venezuelan opposition's envoy to Washington said that all 8 Venezuelan consular offices in the US are no longer functional. While giving the speech, Carlos Vecchio was confronted by anti-war activists.
I want to say these people are fraud. They don't represent the Venezuelan people. They are representing the U.S. orchestrated coup. This is a very dangerous situation. They want to create a crisis at the border that would be a justification for U.S. intervention.
Meanwhile, the woman in that video, Media Benjamin from the Code Pink anti-war movement, says that the opposition is knowingly stoking tensions at the border.
I think it's a dangerous game that the opposition is playing. They really are trying to create a confrontation. If it was about humanitarian aid, they could have used the UN agencies, and certainly there are lots of other ways to get humanitarian aid into Venezuela. They are doing this purposely on the borders because they want to see a confrontation. They want the Maduro government to respond with violence so they can show the whole world and use that as a pretext to start the next phase of this, which would be a military one. So I think it really is the opposition that is playing this very dangerous game and using the aid as a prop in their playbook.
Venezuela's self-proclaimed leader, Juan Guaido, has promised to get the aid into the country by Saturday. That is, despite elected President Nicolas Maduro banning it, over fears, as we've mentioned, that aid convoys could be used to smuggle weapons to the opposition. Well, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson did echo that sentiment. I discussed this with RT's Igor Zhidanov.
The spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, has said that the situation in Venezuela is already critical. She has pointed out that America is already amassing weapons on the border with the country, and also everything is being done to sort of feed the narrative of urgency, to kind of spike it up further. For example, President wannabe Guaido, he is adding fuel to the flames, saying that the deadline for humanitarian aid to enter the country is Saturday. So this is the deadline that he has set, so everything feeding into this narrative. And Donald Trump from Washington, he's basically trying to talk the country's military into treason.
The U.S. is deliberately making the situation worse by making out that we are beyond the point of no return. The U.S. president's direct appeal to the Venezuelan army to ignore the orders of the legitimate head of state is the height of cynicism. Imagine addressing the U.S. army with an appeal, for example, not to obey the commander-in-chief.
And at the same time, Washington is also encouraging protesters in Venezuela. They are keeping them hopeful. According to Maria Zakharova, they have information that, well, the United States could try and arm civilians in Venezuela with third-party weapons. Have a listen.
The delivery of the weapons to Venezuela is planned for the beginning of March this year, in several stages via the neighboring country, using the cargo planes of international companies. Unfortunately, this is not surprising to see Ukrainian traces in this story. Specifically, they're going to use the state-owned Antonov company.
And really, this scenario of aid, humanitarian aid convoys turning out to be really just Trojan horses filled with munitions and arms, this scenario is not really ungrounded, because the man the United States appointed to be their special envoy in Venezuela now is Elliot Abrams, and he has experience in doing exactly that thing. For example, in 1986 in Nicaragua, he filled aid convoys with weapons, and that's how he smuggled arms into another country. Now, Maria Zakharova also pointed out what, Russia views as hypocrisy on behalf of the United States and their foreign policy, because, for example, she pointed out that while the United States are calling for peaceful protests in Haiti, they're saying that the opposition in Haiti shouldn't be going beyond peacefully protesting and calling for a political solution in the country. The situation in Venezuela somehow proves different.